The chandeliers glowed like clusters of golden stars above the ballroom, scattering their warm light across velvet drapes and marble floors polished to a mirror's shine. Crystal glasses chimed in delicate symphony, paired with the soft hum of conversation and the occasional burst of laughter from the wealthiest guests in the city. Waiters and waitresses glided like shadows among the glittering tables, their uniforms crisp, their movements rehearsed to near perfection. Among them was Elena, balancing a tray of champagne flutes with effortless grace. She walked lightly, her expression calm and unreadable, her dark eyes observing everything but never lingering too long on anyone. To most, she was invisible, another uniform in a room of diamonds and silk gowns. But not to him. Seated at one of the center tables, surrounded by equally wealthy companions, was Viktor Sokolov, a billionaire whose name was etched into headlines and whispered at stock exchanges. His suit was tailored, his presence commanding, his laughter sharp enough to draw eyes across the room. Women nearby leaned subtly closer whenever he spoke, their jewelry catching the light, hoping for a glance, a smile. Yet Victor's gaze had wandered elsewhere, to the young waitress weaving through the crowd, serving glasses as though she were untouched by the glittering aura of wealth and power around her. His lips curved into a smirk, one that made his companions lean in curiously. He tapped his finger against the stem of his glass, never taking his eyes off Elena, and spoke in Russian, a language none of the nearby staff seemed likely to understand. His voice was low, teasing, yet loud enough for his friends to hear. "Smotri na ne," he murmured, his tone almost amused. "Look at her, she walks as if this place belongs to her, but she carries glasses instead of jewels." His friends chuckled, nodding with interest, their eyes darting toward Elena. She continued her work, expression steady, neither flustered nor fazed by the weight of his gaze. Encouraged, Victor added, "A by priglasil I za moj stol promo sekas, esli by ona panamala hot slovo." I would invite her to my table right now, if she understood a single word. His smirk widened. To him, this was harmless fun, a game of wit where only he knew the rules. Elena, however, paused ever so slightly while setting a flute onto a tray. Her eyes flicked toward him for less than a second before returning to her task. No one else noticed, but had Victor been paying closer attention, he might have seen it, the faint spark that betrayed her awareness. The night continued, the orchestra swelling with classical music as Victor shifted between conversation and his quiet commentary in Russian. Sometimes he leaned back in his chair, describing the way her hands moved with elegance unusual for a waitress. Other times, he teased that her shoes, though plain, seemed to carry her with more pride than the heels of the socialites around him. His friends laughed along, tossing in their own remarks, entertained by his performance. To Victor, the game was amusing precisely because he believed it was one-sided. There was power in speaking freely, cloaked in the safety of a language no one else in the room would bother to understand. And yet, each time he spoke, Elena's lips pressed just a little tighter, her composure tested but never broken. As she passed his table once more, the air between them seemed to shift, though Victor couldn't quite place why. He raised his glass to his lips, smirk still in place, convinced she was nothing more than a silent figure in the background of his glittering evening. Little did he know, the silence was her choice, not her ignorance. And soon, that silence would end. The orchestra's music deepened, the violins drawing out a romantic melody that floated over the chatter of the ballroom. Waiters passed with trays heavy with caviar, truffle canapes, and champagne that sparkled like liquid gold. The clinking of crystal and the rustle of gowns stitched with thousands of beads set the rhythm of the evening, but Elena's focus was razor-sharp. She had trained herself to glide through these spaces unseen, her presence blending into the flow of service. Tonight, however, there was a weight following her, eyes that burned with amusement and curiosity. Viktor Sokolov leaned back in his chair, his friends clustered around him like planets orbiting a sun. His dark suit contrasted sharply with the silver cufflinks that caught the candlelight, his posture relaxed, one arm resting over the back of his chair as though he owned the room itself. Every so often, his gaze drifted toward Elena, and with each glance came another quiet remark in Russian. It was a game he enjoyed, a way to spice up an evening he otherwise found predictable. When she passed with a tray of champagne, Victor smirked and murmured to his companions, "I pohodka zazny, gemu luboy zenseny zadiz." Ivis ona prosto officiantka. Her walk is more graceful than any woman here. And yet she is just a waitress. His friends laughed quietly, one of them shaking his head at Victor's relentless teasing. Another time, as Elena bent gracefully to set down a glass at a nearby table, Victor whispered, "You ne glad Korolevi, no ruki sluzenki. Kakao ironia, she has the eyes of a queen, but the hands of a servant." What irony! Again, the laughter came, rich men indulging in the arrogance of their circle. Elena's expression did not waver. Her lips remained in their faint professional curve, her eyes lowered politely whenever they should be. Yet, beneath her calm surface, she heard every syllable. Each Russian word brushed against a part of her that she rarely revealed, a childhood of literature and language, evenings spent curled up with her grandmother who taught her Russian lullabies and stories. It was a skill she carried quietly, never advertising it, never needing to. And now, it gave her an edge no one in this glittering room expected. She moved among the guests with deliberate calm, reminding herself of her role. She was here to serve, not to stand out. But each time Victor's voice floated in Russian, a heat rose in her chest. It wasn't only arrogance, it was the assumption, the sheer certainty in his tone, that she was invisible, incapable, beneath him. That sting of underestimation pressed harder with every remark. Victor, meanwhile, grew bolder with the ease of wine and his own amusement. His friends egged him on, one even daring him to call her over. He smirked and shook his head. Net, pust ona ostanetsa zagodkoch, zabavno talk. No, let her remain a mystery. It's more fun this way. Yet, despite his nonchalance, Victor found himself watching her more often than he admitted. There was something in the way she moved, efficient, yes, but never rushed. Her hands steady, her eyes alert, her back impossibly straight. He had met countless women who fought for his attention, but here was someone who didn't even glance at him. He had to speak about her, even if only in Russian, even if she couldn't understand. The more he teased, the more captivated he became. His words were playful, but beneath them was genuine intrigue. Who was this girl who didn't stumble under his stare? Who carried trays like a ballerina, untouched by the weight of the room? By the time dessert was being prepared, Victor leaned close to his companions and muttered in Russian, his tone dipping into something more daring. Esli biona nala, sito e gavoru, e by skazel edge promo, u ne bolse klasa, gemu vise zensen vietum, zale. If she knew what I was saying, I'd tell her directly, she has more class than every woman in this hall. His friends chuckled, raising their glasses to toast his wit. But Elena's hand tightened ever so slightly around the tray she carried. She placed it down gently, her composure unshaken, though her eyes flashed for just a heartbeat. She had heard every word. And soon, he would learn that. The ballroom was reaching its crescendo. Dessert had been served. Delicate towers of mousse and glazed fruit glittering like jewels beneath the light of the chandeliers. The orchestra swelled, violins climbing higher as laughter rippled across the tables. Wine had loosened tongues, and the wealthy leaned closer together, indulging in secrets and gossip. Yet Viktor Sokolov's attention remained fixed on the one person in the room who hadn't spared him more than a professional glance all night. Elena. She moved past him again, this time with a tray of coffee cups, the faint scent of roasted beans drifting in her wake. Victor's eyes followed her, his smirk tugging back into place. His companions were already watching, waiting for his next remark, their amusement stoked by the evening's game. Victor lowered his voice, letting the Russian roll easily off his tongue, a velvet tone edged with arrogance. Ona, verotno, mektate, sito bikato tu, kake, posmotrol na ne devozdi. No ona ne osmolitsa podnat vzglad. She probably dreams that someone like me would look at her twice. But she would never dare to lift her eyes. Laughter burst from his table, subtle enough not to disturb the other guests, but loud enough for him to bask in it. He leaned back, enjoying the ease of his own confidence. But then it happened. Elena stopped. It was only for a heartbeat, half a second where her graceful pace faltered, but the silence that followed was heavy, unexpected. Her tray of coffee cups steadied in her hands as she turned her head, her eyes locking on Victor's with a calmness that was far more dangerous than anger. The music played on, the chatter continued, but at their table, time seemed to slow. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something sharper. And then, In flawless Russian, she spoke. Interesno. Откуда u vas taka uverenist, sito a tolko mektau, mozet bite, a prosto ne vipekatlina. Interesting, where do you get such confidence that I only dream? Perhaps I'm simply not impressed. The tray landed soundlessly on the table as if punctuating her words. The cups and saucers aligned perfectly, her hands steady, her poise unshaken. The effect was electric. Victor's friends froze, eyes widening, their laughter caught in their throats. One man nearly spilled his wine, another blinked as though unsure he had heard correctly. Victor himself felt his smirk vanish, his posture stiffening for the first time that evening. Her Russian was flawless, not broken, not accented in a way he could dismiss. Every syllable struck with precision, every intonation carrying an edge of wit that cut sharper than any blade. Elena didn't linger, though. She placed the last cup, straightened, and tilted her head just enough to hold his gaze for a beat longer. A slisala kazdo vase slovo, she added calmly. I heard every word you said. A rush of heat crept up Victor's neck. He, Viktor Sokolov, the man who built empires, who controlled boardrooms with a glance, was suddenly stripped of the control he thought he had. For once, he had been outmaneuvered. The table was silent except for the faint clink of silverware in the background and the swell of violins. Then, slowly, a grin tugged at Victor's lips, not the smug, careless grin he had worn all night, but something else. Amusement, fascination, respect. He leaned forward slightly, breaking the silence with a low chuckle. Nu sito z, he replied in Russian, his tone softer, more measured now. Well then. His eyes glinted with something that hadn't been there before. Pahos, a ozabalsa. It seems I was mistaken. Alina's expression didn't falter. She inclined her head politely, as though acknowledging nothing more than a standard comment from a guest. Then she turned, her steps carrying her away with the same unshaken grace as before. But the air was different now, charged, thick with the knowledge that the game had changed. Around him, Victor's friends began murmuring in shock, some chuckling nervously, others staring after Elena with awe. But Victor barely heard them. His eyes remained fixed on her retreating figure, his mind reeling. For the first time in years, someone had surprised him. And he wasn't sure whether it was the sting of being outwitted or the thrill of meeting an equal that set his heart racing. Whatever it was, Victor knew one thing with absolute certainty. The waitress was no longer invisible. She was unforgettable. The ballroom slowly exhaled from its earlier energy, laughter softening into murmurs as guests savored the final sips of champagne. The orchestra shifted into a gentler tune, violins weaving notes that felt almost like a lullaby after the fire of the evening's crescendo. The gala was drawing to a close, but for Viktor Sokolov, the night had just been rewritten. He had been humbled. No, more than that, he had been startled. His mind replayed the moment Elena had turned to him, her Russian flowing smooth and sharp as crystal. Every word she had spoken echoed louder than the orchestra, louder than his friends' awkward laughter. For the first time in years, he had not been the cleverest man in the room. At his table, his companions were still buzzing with disbelief. One of them chuckled nervously, raising his glass. I suppose that puts you in your place, Victor. The others smirked, but carefully, wary of pushing too far. They were men who thrived on his approval, and the fact that they dared to tease him now only highlighted how extraordinary the moment had been. But Victor wasn't angry. He leaned back in his chair, lips curving into a slower, more genuine smile than he had worn all night. His eyes trailed after Elena as she moved across the room, her tray empty now, her shoulders squared, her steps calm. She hadn't lingered, hadn't waited for a reaction, she had simply delivered her words and walked away, as though the entire encounter meant nothing to her. That, more than anything, fascinated him. Most people lived for his attention. They hungered for it, bent themselves into shapes to earn even a passing smile. Yet Elena had stripped his arrogance bare and continued on, untouched by the weight of who he was. That unshakable composure, that quiet defiance, was like a spark in his veins. When she returned for another round, collecting empty glasses, Victor saw his chance. He rose from his chair, ignoring the surprised glances of his friends, and stepped into her path. She halted smoothly, not startled, not flustered, her gaze lifting to meet his without hesitation. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The music swelled around them, the glow of the chandeliers bathing her face in warm light. Victor tilted his head, his tone softer now, stripped of arrogance, though still threaded with his natural charisma. "You speak Russian better than most Russians I know," he said, this time in English, testing the waters. Alina's lips curved faintly. "I had a good teacher," she replied, her voice calm, professional, yet carrying that same edge of intelligence he had glimpsed before. He studied her, trying to read the depths behind her steady gaze. "You've kept it a secret." "Why?" She gave the slightest shrug, balancing her tray against her hip. "Not every talent needs to be announced. Some are better left unspoken, until the right moment." Her words were precise, deliberate, reminding him that her earlier revelation had not been an accident, it had been a choice. Victor felt his chest tighten with something that was both amusement and admiration. He had built empires on reading people, predicting their moves, calculating their ambitions. But here was someone he couldn't place, couldn't measure, and that unsettled him in the most exhilarating way. He leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping. "Then I should consider myself lucky that you chose that moment with me." For the first time, a spark of humor flickered in her eyes. "Or unlucky," she countered smoothly, before stepping past him with the tray. Victor watched her go, a low laugh escaping his throat, genuine and rare. His friends stared at him, some bewildered, others amused, but none dared interrupt. They knew that look on his face, the sharp focus of a man who had found a new obsession. As Elena disappeared into the kitchen doors, Victor's smile lingered. He had walked into the gala certain of his power, certain of his charm, certain of his control. But he would leave it with a question that would haunt him long after the chandeliers dimmed. Who was she really? For the first time in years, Viktor Sokolov felt the thrill of pursuit, not of profit, not of status, but of a person. And deep down, he already knew one truth: he hadn't chosen this game. Elena had, and he was already losing.